Welcome to the EASE Workshop Series. This PowerPoint acts as supplemental information for the Advanced Library Research and Scientific Reading workshops given by the Centennial Science and Engineering Library. This workshop provides approaches on how to tackle the writing of scientific manuscripts. So let's get started. Let us look at a quote found in Scientific Writing, a Writer and Reader's Guide. Be published or not, reviewers decide. Be cited or not, readers decide. The way you communicate through your writing will open or close the world for the readers that are interested in what you want to present. So being clear is of most importance. The first thing that I want to mention when it comes to writing your own paper is that you can use the steps to reading a scientific paper that we outline in the EASE Reading Workshop. So if you're not familiar with that outline and you would like to know more, you can access the workshop through the EASE website or EASE YouTube channel. Just as with reading, you'll want to focus on one section at a time. It is also very important to do enough background reading to set a foundation for your paper. Lastly, keep in mind that there may be resources that you can utilize to proofread your article. If you're in school, a place like CAPS can be very helpful. One thing that is difficult to do is make sure that there is no fluff. That means that every word is important. This is hard because in our English classes, we've been trained to elaborate, use extensive descriptions, and paint a picture for the reader. The structure of each paragraph should be such that the first sentence sets the stage for the rest of the paragraph. Also, use active first person in the past tense. That means speak as if the work was already completed, which if you think about it at this point, it should. If you're not familiar with the first person pronouns, they are I, me, we, us, mine. To make it active, say, I threw the ball, rather than the ball was thrown by me. Another example is fish received food, rather than the fish were fed. The exception to this rule is the results section, which are written in the present tense because they are what they are, even now. The best place to start is with an outline, which should include bullet points that you aim to address within each subheader. Once you have a good picture of the content of the entire paper, then start with the introduction. Do the abstract and title last, so that you make sure they accurately reflect the points you made in your paper. Make sure that your figures and tables are clear and can stand alone from the text. Double check your citations, including formatting, even if you use a cite while you type. And make sure your figure table numbers make the order they appear in the text. Lastly, I can't say this enough. Edit and proofread your paper and make sure to have others do the same. At various stages of the paper, getting another person's perspective is great for both content and grammar, and we all have different styles and backgrounds, so it helps weed out any issues the text may have. A trick people use to go over their manuscript is reading the paper out loud. And read each sentence forwards, then backwards, then forwards. This helps find repeat words, missing words, or improper use of words. You want to make sure the paper is as clean as possible so that the reader can focus on the content of the paper rather than becoming confused as a result of poor writing style. If you find yourself needing more information on what content should go into each section of your paper, read the paper by Steingraver and al. You can find a direct link on the EASE website. We will focus now on two sections that both students and graduates struggle on differentiating. I'm talking about the results and discussion sections. The results are the raw data presented in a completely objective fashion, while the discussion is the author's interpretation of the results. So there may be a slightly subjective slant. For example, 53 out of the 55 test species, 96.4%, were assigned to the correct phylum in the analysis at this level. Table 2. The exceptions were the polychaete annelid that grouped most closely with a mollusk and a bivalve that grouped with one of the arthropod outliers. However, In both cases, there was substantial sequence divergence, 13% and 25%, respectively, between the test taxon and the lineage in the profile that was most similar to it. Identification success at the ordinal level was 100%, as all 50 insect species were assigned to the correct order. So you can see that the results section does not attempt to explain the results, but rather just state what they are. It is here in the discussion that points to the interpretation. The two misidentifications at the phylum level were undoubtedly a consequence of the limited size and diversity of our phylum profile. The misplaced polychaete belonged to an order that was not in the profile, while the misidentified mollusk belonged to a subclass that was represented in the profile by just a single species. Such misidentifications would not occur in profiles that more thoroughly surveyed CO1 diversity among members of the target assemblage. So now we're going to go over some of the problems that people encounter when they're trying to write a manuscript. The difficulty in literature is not to write, but to write what you mean, not to affect your reader, but to affect him precisely as you wish. And so many times we know what we are saying, but that doesn't mean that our reader will. For example, let's say that you write, "The experiment tried to." Well, this is not really accurate. Experiments can't do anything. The correct way of phrasing this would be, "Scientists designed an experiment to test whether," and so on. Let's consider other common problems that appear in your own writing. Take a minute to read the paragraph and see what you find. If you need to, you can pause the video so that you can fully focus on this. Hopefully you found some of the problems, but if you didn't, some of them are the use of between rather than among, the lack of italics for Latin names or words. Although this may not be an issue for a discussion section since it may be addressed earlier in the paper, make sure to spell out abbreviations the first time you use them. Assigning intent when it's not appropriate. Evolution is a process, thus it can't design. You don't need to say "see," it is implied. Depending on the field, you may need to combine back-to-back parentheticals. Combine neighboring parentheses with a semicolon, like down here. Proof should only be used if there is a mathematical proof. The word support or something like that is better. However, and therefore should have a semicolon or a period before it. Otherwise, it is a very long run-on sentence. Data is plural, thus it should read "this data." Don't switch between the pronouns I and we. Some other words that are often mixed up are shown here. If you find you struggle with any of them, take some time to look at their background and identify how they're different. Another thing to consider as you're writing is to try and avoid cliches and overused expressions because people are tired of them, and it shows a lack of creativity. As you read more, you will identify what is overused in literature. It is not really too long ago that the journal Nature basically banned the use of holy grails in papers. You can find titles that say the holy grail of physics, biofuels, cancer research, you name it. This is just one example of many that you'll find as you read more scientific literature. And you can even just do a simple Google search and many of them will just pop up. Other common cliches are shedding light. As it's shown here, shedding more light on the intriguing roles of LBS. Also, the missing link. And lastly, the use of paradigm. Another thing to consider is to not be redundant. For example, don't start each sentence off with I did this, I researched this. Have some verbal variety. And we all know that data is a deep philosophical question. But some other tricky verbiage that trips people up are the difference between singular and plural forms. So some examples of this are species and genus versus genera. When writing a paper, it is important to make sure that you cite what is in the paper, and vice versa. You may wonder why there are several types of formats, but the reality is that they often reflect the disciplines that utilize them. Take as an example the one shown here. In the case of MLA, this style is widely used in the humanities, since the style is well suited to literature and archival sources, while APA is a style that is widely used in social sciences, since the style is well suited to quantitative studies and analysis. The examples shown here are similar in that they utilize brief in-text citations in conjunction with a list of expanded citation information. The in-text citation typically, but not always, appears in parentheses, and for most part, they require the same information: author name, title of article, source such as book, journal, newspaper, etc., the year of publication. But keep in mind that the information gets organized differently. An example of this is that while both need the author's name, MLA requires the full name while APA asks for the initials of the first and middle name. However, when considering a publication in a journal, you do have to remember that the format of your literature cited depends on the journal. So double check you have this right. When finding papers to cite, a benefit of using an article database is that you can move forward and backwards in time, so you can see which citations a paper has or who has cited that paper. The main feature that is great about this is you can also save these references to EndNote Web, which has a Cite While You Type plugin. This is actually free if you are a UNM student. There are two main benefits to using EndNote. Number one is that if you misplace your copy of an actual article, you can look it up again here through Find at UNM rather than researching for the document. Number two is that the plugin itself is great because if you add or remove citations in the body of your paper, you don't have to constantly be rechecking your citations and formatting because it does it for you. If you realize you are using the wrong citation format, you can change your favorites and update all of the citations, both in text and in the reference list, to the correct format with the click of a button. Although the Cite While You Type plugins are very helpful, you still need to check the format of the citations, because often when you search for literature in Web of Knowledge, the entry itself is off. Italics may be missing, or the title could be in all caps, as with this example, or a number of other issues. So make sure to double check your citations and edit them within EndNote as necessary, so the next time you use that citation, it is correct. One of the great things of citing correctly is that it helps you avoid plagiarism, which is the practice of taking someone else's work or ideas and passing them off as one's own. And make no mistake, plagiarism is punishable by law. The plagiarist knows that they are not the author of the work, and yet they willfully and deliberately put their name. In universities, it is also known as academic misconduct, but the reality is that it is fraud. So when it comes to scientific writing, you can avoid plagiarism by use your own words, whether you are writing down your idea or discussing someone else's. Generally avoid paraphrasing as much as possible. When you rewrite someone else's text in your own words, you still have to cite the source at the end of the paraphrased passage. And when in doubt, just cite. If you find yourself citing excessively because of this, it could be an indication that you're not writing enough in your own words. This is a sign you should consider rewriting your paper. Also, don't recycle images, figures, tables, or text from one of your own previously published papers without citing. In that case, you are even committing self-plagiarism. And when you can't absolutely avoid it, ask for permission. If you want to use a figure, table, or any kind of data that has not been published before and has been created or gathered by someone who is not a co-author in your paper, you absolutely must ask their permission and attribute it to them. We have a few last points before we wrap things up. First is the use of the lab notebook. This is one of the most important things you can do in scientific research. It's keeping excellent records of everything you do, from the actual experiment to the data analysis. If you're not sure if you should write it down, just write it down. Sometimes there is a break between experiment runs, and it's easier to just refer back to your notes rather than relearning each step. Also, you may notice patterns emerge that can help you figure out and move forward in your research in the future. For example, a colleague recorded the ambient temperature upon collection of his samples in the field. He noticed after many observations that his targeted species was only collected between a certain temperature range. Had he not recorded this information, he would not be able to focus his collection efforts to those when the temperature falls within that range. The more organized you are, the easier all of this will be. If you have difficulty organizing your lab notebooks, the following documents are available on the EASE website and can assist you in improving those skills. The last thing that is often a challenge is working with others. This is an inherent issue in STEM research. The first thing that can help you is determining what role each person should take. Have somebody take the lead, and others can be in charge of the experiment while someone takes notes or is recording the results. Somebody can run the analysis while another person creates figures, graphs, and you can also break up the writing into sections. Do consider that it is important for every person to edit the paper. Make sure you are all clear on the big question you are trying to address. What are the goals of this experiment, of this research? How will you attain these goals? What is the best approach? Also, speak up. If you disagree with something, whether it is the question, the approach, the interpretation, the roles, anything, it is important to say so, but do so in a tactful manner. Lastly, everything always takes longer than you think it should. Take the amount of time you think something will take and triple it. That's how much time you should really plan for. It's always better to have extra time than not enough. We have reached the end of the workshop. The writing techniques presented here are useful for several STEM fields. So don't think too much on the examples provided, but rather on the main points for how you should write. I have no doubt you will develop your own voice in no time. If you can, please take some time to access the survey link shown to give us some feedback. Thank you for watching.